If you're anything like me, you're probably very excited for Christopher Nolan's new film, Oppenheimer. I know it's become such a cliche thing to say as a movie fan, but I really think he's one of the best working today, and is probably going to go down as one of the best filmmakers of the 21st century, but probably of all time as well. On top of all that, the film just looks fantastic. After being a little bit underwhelmed by Tenet, I really wanted Nolan to go back and tell a smaller story with an emphasis on character, and I could not have been more excited when this was announced as his follow-up film. Unfortunately, we still have quite a few months to wait till Oppenheimer's release in July, so rather than just rewatch the rest of Nolan's filmography on repeat till then, I thought I'd take the chance to talk about some films that I think resemble Nolan's latest. Whether it be from a stylistic standpoint, having a similar subject matter, or even from a thematic standpoint. I should preface this by saying that these are not films I believe Nolan has taken inspiration from when crafting Oppenheimer, and more importantly, that all the films mentioned here are worth watching on their own merits, not just because they remind me of Nolan's latest. So I thought I'd get this one out the way first, because any big Nolan fan has probably already seen this film, but I wanted to mention it for a very specific reason. Nolan throughout his career has subtly been working in trilogies, and I think Oppenheimer might be a continuation of that trend. He has the Dark Knight trilogy, that's his most obvious one, as it features the same characters and an overarching story over three films. But he also has his original sci-fi trilogy of Inception, Interstellar, and Tenet. They all contain original concepts told on a grand scale, and they all feature themes of parenthood and family, as well as having smaller scale stories with massive stakes and set pieces as a backdrop. Whether it be Leonardo DiCaprio's character's quest to return to his children, or Matthew McConaughey's character's quest to return to his children, or the protagonist and Neil's friendship in Tenet. What he also has is something I think of as a subtle trilogy in Memento, Insomnia, and The Prestige. All three of Nolan's lowest budgeted films, and all of which I would argue are his darkest on an emotional level. They all feature characters dealing with specific issues, and it's generally what drives the respective films' plots. In Memento, it's Leonard Shelby's retrograde amnesia that allows the film's plot to play out in its unique structure. In Insomnia, it's quite obviously the main character's insomnia. And in The Prestige, it's all about the obsession that Hugh Jackman's character has over discovering the secret of Christian Bale's central magic trick. I mention all this because up until now, Dunkirk was something of an outlier in Nolan's filmography, and I don't mean that as a criticism at all. The fact it stands out as unique in his films is one of the reasons why it's one of my favourites of his. But up until now, it was the only film of his to centre around any sort of historical event, and seeing as Oppenheimer is the second film to have a plot relating to World War II, I can't wait to see if Nolan's going to continue this tradition and create any kind of thematic link between this film and Oppenheimer. So I won't lie, I don't really love A Beautiful Mind that much. I think it's one of the weaker Best Picture winners in the last 20 years, but beyond that, I think the dialogue is overwritten, and some of the aspects of the main character's mental illness just come across as almost cartoonishly over the top, while at other times being fairly surface level in its execution. But the reason I think it's worth watching in relation to Oppenheimer is the predicament of their main characters. Two real life figures dealing with the regret of their past actions and how it comes to affect their psyche. Though in the case of A Beautiful Mind, that mental turmoil is what drives the film's plot, whereas in Oppenheimer, his mental struggles come across as a result of his past actions that the film will focus on. Based on what little footage we've seen from Oppenheimer, Murphy seems to have that thousand-yard stare that Crow's character exhibits a few times in A Beautiful Mind, where there's just so much shame and regret going on behind their characters' eyes. You can almost tell everything about their characters based off these looks, and based off Oppenheimer's true life story, I think the film is going to be rife with opportunities to earn that regretful stare that define Oppenheimer as a character. Next up is what I consider to be a very underrated recent David Fincher movie. I love Fincher just as much as I love Nolan. I'm so happy we're getting a film from each of them this year, and I'm so excited to see Nolan getting into the biopic realm like Fincher did with Mank. Mank centers around screenwriter Herman Mankiewicz before, during, and after his process writing one of the most well-regarded scripts of all time, Citizen Kane. The reason I'm including this film in relation to Oppenheimer, beyond the obvious similarity of a black and white aesthetic, is the structure. Like almost every Nolan film, I fully expect Oppenheimer to have a non-linear approach to its storytelling. It seems as if the story is going to play out in flashbacks with the 1954 hearings regarding Oppenheimer's security clearance as the framing device for these flashbacks. And Mank plays out in a very similar way. Mank plays out through flashbacks as Herman Mankiewicz writes the script for Citizen Kane as he ponders his past in Hollywood and how it led him to that point. While I mostly liked the structure in Mank, it did make the film feel a bit uneven and directionless at times. It didn't always feel like there was an exact thematic purpose for these time jumps, and rather it was just a means of telling us more about Mank and that era of Hollywood. While this is a valid reason for a flashback, I feel like Mank doesn't use it enough as a means of progressing the actual story, making the plot feel a bit weak. The reason I think the structure is going to work in Oppenheimer's favour is that I think it'll create a consistent sense of foreboding, a dread that all the events in the past are leading up to the present, a present completely devoid of hope and filled with regret, giving a proper thematic reason for the black and white aesthetic. If done successfully, it could add so much tension to the events of the film and give all the flashbacks an event to build towards. Another recent underrated film from a great director is First Man, Damien Chazelle's biopic following Neil Armstrong in the years leading up to his Apollo 11 mission that led to him becoming the first man to walk on the moon. I feel like the similarities, or at least theoretical similarities, between these two films are pretty apparent. Two intimate, years spanning stories that focus just as much on the characters as it just the central events being depicted. Giselle also utilised many of the techniques that Nolan has become well known for, such as the use of IMAX photography and practical effects over CGI. On top of all that, First Man also has Nolan's regular production designer, Nathan Crowley. While I certainly think Chazelle puts his own mark on the film, I think the inspiration is pretty apparent. Armstrong is just as linked to the Apollo landing as Oppenheimer is to the Manhattan Project, but not as much is known about them as people. First Man shed a light on Armstrong as a person in very much the same way I expect Nolan's film to do for Robert Oppenheimer. The last film I want to talk about is Martin Scorsese's The Aviator, a film that has a lot of similarities to Oppenheimer. Martin Scorsese's film follows aviator Howard Hughes across 20 years of his life as his career progresses while his mental health declines. I think The Aviator is one of the better biopics we've had in the last 20 years, and it does what I hope Nolan's film was going to do and take a subject matter that in the wrong hands could be monotonous, but manages to make it continuously gripping. But the reason I want to talk about the film beyond all the similarities between Hughes and Oppenheimer is the fact that The Aviator was almost a Nolan movie. In the early 2000s, after he was coming off Memento and Insomnia, Nolan wrote his own script depicting the life of Howard Hughes. And it would have focused on his later years when he had become fully overcome by his OCD and did not leave the sanctity of his own hotel rooms for the last 20 years of his life. Unfortunately, though, when Scorsese and DiCaprio's film was announced, it became clear that Nolan's movie would be coming out in close proximity. With Nolan fearing his movie wouldn't be able to stand on its own, he abandoned the project. One of the things I've always respected about Nolan as a filmmaker is his lack of unmade projects. As much as I love directors like Scorsese, Fincher, and Tarantino, I think they've all developed a bit of a bad habit in recent years of announcing projects that never end up happening. And as a result, every time a film of theirs gets announced, I can't help but approach it with a degree of skepticism. This potential Hughes movie is Nolan's only exception, and I've wondered for years what his version of Hughes' life would have looked like. And I think he's going to take a lot of concepts from that script and put it into his depiction of Oppenheimer's story. I always hoped he would eventually come back round to this script, but with Oppenheimer's announcement, I don't think it's that likely. It's a shame because I don't necessarily think that Nolan and Scorsese's films need to exist in opposition to each other. Of the two being very different filmmakers, I think these films would have made good companion pieces to each other, with Nolan's film picking up essentially where The Aviator left off. Since I've always wanted to see Nolan's Howard Hughes movie, I'm hoping Oppenheimer can provide some closure for this story. So those are the five films that I think are worth watching in the lead up to Oppenheimer's release this summer. As I said, I think all these films are worth watching on their own merits. I can't help but be excited to see how many of my predictions about their similarities end up being correct. If you like this video, I would appreciate if you could like and subscribe. My Twitter and Letterboxd profiles are both linked in the description. And once again, thanks for watching.